Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Hello everyone, we hope you're enjoying We Have Ways of Making You Talk. We're jumping in here because we'd love to tell you about an amazing new show called Legacy, hosted by the brilliant historian Peter Frankopan, good friend of mine, and the broadcaster Afua Hirsch.
It's a podcast which delves into the lives of some of the most incredible people to ever have lived and asks, do they have the reputation they deserve? So far, they've covered icons and leaders like Alan Turing, Napoleon. I mean, these are big fish, aren't they, Jim? Cleopatra,
massive.
Gorbachev, absolute giants of history whose legacies still impact us today.
And this season, they're looking into the life of possibly the greatest Brit and wartime leader to have ever lived, Sir Winston Spencer Churchill.
For a programme about reputations and about legacy, he's Moby Dick, isn't he? He's the white whale. They've gone for the biggest of the lot.
They've gone for the big one.
Well, because Napoleon, that's a long time ago. We can put Napoleon away, can't we? Gorbachev was still living with it, but Churchill, I think, he's very, very interesting, isn't he? Because he occupies that space that the Second World War occupies. At some point, you've got to decouple him from being a charismatic war leader and all that in a kind of present sense and put him in history, put him in his place in history. But obviously where he remains a titan, you see. Whereas there's no two ways about it. He's a big figure. You should hear about the guy he was up against as well. It's often my riposte to people when they talk about Churchill. And of course, it's his 150th birthday to boot this month. So it's a great time to talk about his life.
Yeah, I mean, he's born into an aristocratic family. He begins his career as a soldier and war correspondent before entering politics. When he becomes prime minister during the Second World War, his unwavering resolve and military insight definitely helps lead the Allies to victory.
Just things like after the Gallipoli campaign, the fact that he goes to the Western Front. And some people say, he went and he did it for show, but he still went.
Yeah, of course. He started off as a Liberal, then joins the Tory party. And it's interesting because a lot of his policy ideas, protecting trade unions, levying heavy taxes on the wealthy, to fund social welfare programs, instigating the
national insurance.
Yes.
After all
of that as well. Labour exchanges.
Yeah.
Inviting refugees into Britain. Those kind of put him at odds with some of the Tory party men back then, and probably would do so today as well.
So he's a complex fellow, but who lived in complex times. And I think that's probably the understatement of the century.
Anyway, we're about to play you a clip from episode 1. Churchill is 21 at this time, still a student at Sandhurst. But at this moment in time, he's in Cuba. Don't forget that. But not a soldier of the British Empire, as you might expect. Find out why.
Follow Legacy on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge entire seasons early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts.
Churchill, at the end of the 1890s, joins as a second lieutenant in the 4th Queen's Own Hussars, which is a cavalry regiment. But in fact, his first taste of action is not in the army. It's not even in the British Empire, but rather strangely comes from Cuba, Afua. How does Cuba fit into all of this?
Well, Cuba is a really formative part of Churchill's story because he encounters two of the things that will forever define his legacy. And the first of those is something unexpectedly close to my heart because he manages, in the summer of 1885, when the Spanish colonial government are engaged in a guerrilla war in Cuba, to persuade the Daily Graphic to allow him to follow in his father's footsteps and become a war correspondent. Now, this becomes a real pillar of Churchill's identity, his ability to control the story about himself and the things he's involved in. But it also becomes an important source of income throughout his adult life because even though he's from this great privilege, like many of Britain's aristocratic families in this era, he's actually kind of cash-strapped. So this thirst for adventure that he has from this imperial conditioning and sense of purpose can now be monetized into quite a lucrative source of storytelling for hungry British newspapers who are desperate for these adventures from brave young men at the far-flung corners of the earth.
So he goes to Cuba because the Cubans are trying to get independence from Spain. But Afua, you said that this taught him two things. One is writing stories and you can get paid for it. So he becomes the world's highest paid war correspondent. What's the second thing he picks up in Cuba?
A medal.
Oh, I thought you were going to go cigars. I definitely thought Churchill, Cuba, cigars.
I think he already had, which is unbelievable at this young age, already had a cigar habit. Although I can't imagine Cuba did anything to dampen those tastes. But he wins a medal for bravery in Cuba. So he, from the outset, is not just observer, war correspondent, impartially documenting what's happening. He is also a character himself in the story, taking part and showing already that he has this lust for adventure, but also this lack of fear under fire.
So he's seen fighting in Cuba, but his first serious experience of battle comes in Sudan.
September the 2nd, 1898, Omdurman, Sudan. Leaning forward in the saddle, Churchill watches his horse pawing the ground. With one hand, he soothes his grey Arab polo pony, while the other clutches the 9-foot steel-tipped lance used by his brigade, the 21st Lancers. Over the sun-baked dunes, a fine veil of sand lingers in the air. Around him, men load and reload their pistols. Horses whinny and stamp. Churchill feels a ripple of anticipation. Kicking his pony on, he weaves through a maze of mounted soldiers readying for the charge. At the sound of the bugle, Churchill leads his troop of 20 riders into a canter. Through narrowed eyes, he can see the Khalifa's army of dervish warriors a few hundred yards away. The Lancers break into a gallop, their hooves thundering across the desert floor. Crouching in the saddle, Churchill tips his head back and roars, "Charge!" But cresting a ridge, alarm explodes in his chest. In front of them is a dried riverbed full of hundreds of soldiers lying in wait, cutlasses flashing in the sun as far as his eyes can see. As the dervishes break cover, he hears men crying out. In panic, Churchill yanks the reins, urging his horse towards their flank. But already a wave of warriors is upon him. Using his pistol, he picks off a man a few feet ahead who drops out of sight. Turning, he sees another with a raised sword bearing down. Churchill fires again, so close that his gun strikes the man as he falls. Through a curtain of dust, he watches the dark outlines of dervishes continue to come. Hears the volley of gunfire and the shrieks of the wounded. Twice more, his Mauser pistol delivers him from imminent death. Then, just as quickly, the fighting is over. The enemy retreats, vanishing into the landscape. As the air clears, the harsh sun glares down on the terrible aftermath of the battle. Churchill guides his horse past groaning men and prone corpses mutilated beyond recognition. He winces as a soldier calls out in an unfamiliar tongue, a spear stuck right through him. He realizes at some point he lost his pith helmet. He looks down at his ripped uniform, its gold brocade smeared with blood and dirt. He sees a lancer drive a spear through a wounded dervish, and despite the searing desert heat, he shivers.
I mean, I think those kinds of descriptions, on the one hand, read like a boy's own book, about how exciting it is to be in battle. But the hell of battle, it's hugely traumatic to witness. But what's amazing about Churchill is that it works like adrenaline for him. So he writes to his mother after being shot at on the northwestern frontier. He said, "I don't believe the gods would create so potent a being as myself for so prosaic an ending as to be shot." So as though he's going to be protected by divine intervention. And then he writes, and you'll like this, Afua, "I shall devote my life to the preservation of this great empire and to trying to maintain the progress of the English people." I mean, isn't that just how all empires stick together? That's what Romans would have been saying. I suppose that's what Persians would have been saying. That's what any imperial structure looks like. People have to believe that the gods are protecting them and that there's destiny involved.